All right, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. Happy Tuesday. We are going to go ahead and start with SB 268, Whip Robertson. Do we have a sign-up sheet yet? Sure. And before you start, Whip, I'm going to call on Chairman Smith.
Sorry, I don't usually do this, but I have some special guests here from over in the West Georgia Judicial Circuit. If y'all remember, we had a divorce last year from another circuit. And so anyways, I'd like to welcome Judge Hightower, Superior Court, former member of the House of Representatives, and former, were you Chief Deputy Whip? Chief Deputy Whip, so I don't think it pays any more than it did then. And also, I would like to welcome our District Attorney, Sarah Japor. Go Knowles. So thank y'all for indulging me.
Thank you. Okay, Whip Robertson, can you pull one of those mics to you, please, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. You may start.
I was a little nervous. I thought you were calling on him to pray, and I was going to ask us to stand in the hallway until he finished, but thank you. Yes, ma'am. On 268, we loosely refer to this as the HALO Act. What this does is, if you notice in Section 1, it defines what first responders are so that we can be clear. A lot of times, legislation that we bring up here, especially legislation that I tend to carry, primarily focuses on law enforcement, but we want to make sure that everybody understands the definition related to the HALO Act, that it's law enforcement agencies, fire suppression agencies, rescue agencies, and others that may apply in this case. I know in certain code sections we've referred to DOT employees as first responders in some cases due to crashes and things that occur out there. We give a definition of harass on line 15, and what this primarily does is the individual would commit this offense of interference with a first responder when he or she, after receiving a verbal warning not to approach from a person he or she knows or reasonably should know is a first responder who is engaged in lawful performance of a legal duty, knowingly and willfully violates such warning and approaches or remains within 25 feet of the first responder with the intent to impede or interfere with the first responder's ability to perform such duty, threaten the first responder with physical harm, or harass the first responder. It's a misdemeanor of high and aggravated nature, and there's been some questions, and I absolutely appreciate the question of the 25-foot rule, as if this were some arbitrary number that I may have came up with. There's been years and years of study of what a reactionary zone is, the distance between a first responder and someone who may want to cause harm to the first responder. Primarily the Force Science Institute out of Mankato, Minnesota, has done a lot of study on this to determine what the reactionary time is for first responders to an attack. And the standard number that they came up with was 25 feet. If a person has an edged weapon, if they want to punch, kick, or something, 25 feet is usually the distance required to give a trained first responder an opportunity to respond or react to an attack. And I think Chairman Crow and I were both trained under that 21-foot reactionary rule. So adding the 4 feet to it, I felt would be more comfortable in giving the first responder an opportunity. This does not prohibit someone who wants to video a first responder in action, whether it's a crash or whether it's an arrest. And it really doesn't prevent anybody from yelling, screaming, all this other kind of stuff, as long as it doesn't impede with the first responder being able to offer whatever legal service that they are sworn and required to offer. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll be happy to entertain the questions.
Sure, thank you. You've got several questions. Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my first question is, it just says person and others. Will they have some...
I'm looking on.
I'm sorry, in your first responder defense, I apologize. It says means any person and then at the end it says "and others," which is pretty broad. My question is, will they have to have some sort of identifying badge or uniform?
Well, when you a lot of rural areas, if you see their EMTs and they're called out, a lot of these men and women come out in the middle of the night, and normally they're wearing a pair of, say, blue BDU pants and a white polo shirt. And it's just, if they're carrying out the responsibilities, a lot of times there's a truck or a bus there, an ambulance, if you will. And so anything that should identify them as first responders, if they're administering first aid at a crash, then they would be the one. And what we tried to write it in a way to where if you came upon a scene and it was your loved one involved, it's human nature for you to want to run up there and check on them and all this. And so we tried to write this where there had to be intent to interfere. But most people looking at a scene like that, and again, I understand your concern when I say most people, recognize who those are that are the first responders and providing the aid. Because I'm sure everybody in this room, when given the opportunity, has responded to assist someone in a crash or something, dressed in our blue jeans and go to church clothes.
Okay, and you kind of looked at me when you said the arbitrary 25 feet. It's not that I think the number is arbitrary.
I was looking at her.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yes, my glass eye.
My issue is I just don't know that most ordinary people know how far 25 feet is.
And that's the reason we put the burden on the first responder to tell
warn
the individual, yes, ma'am, you have to be warned to stand back.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Pettish.
Thank you, Senator, for bringing this. We passed a similar act or a similar bill, the HALO Act.
Yes, ma'am.
How is this one different than what
The
we
HALO
passed?
Act, I don't know that it's come out, but I believe they're very close.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I think the one that may came out over here is maybe an exact replica of what they did in Florida. And I think this one's a little different because it gives more distance. Because I think the closer you let people in, the more confusing it gets. If you say 8 feet, 10 feet, things of that nature.
And why did you feel you needed this because a normal obstruction charge wouldn't have the distance involved?
I do, and we live in a society now where we know when traffic slows down, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily something bad happening. It's everybody now is looking, everybody's videoing, everybody's stopping to take photos, and it impedes not only what's going on at that scene, but it impedes the traffic all around it and everything else that's going on. And I don't like this phrase, but people call them looky-loos and all this other kind of stuff. And I think the culture now requires that we kind of evolve into a clearer understanding, because sadly our social media feeds and everything else are filled with tragedy, other people's tragedies and everything, and because of a lot of these people interfering and trying to get good pictures and videos.
Thank you for bringing this bill.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, any other questions from members? And I do not see anybody signed up unless there's... Oh, okay. Oh, you are right. All right. Maisie Lynn from Gactyl can come on up.
Thank you, Chairman. Maisie Lynn Girton. I'm the Executive Director at the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. As Representative Panich noted, your committee has reviewed a bill that's substantially similar to this one. It's House Bill 390, but it did not leave the committee with the language that's in Senate Bill 268. Some of the discussion that has happened around the HALO Act and Senate Bill 268 is the reality that here in Georgia, we already have the crimes of obstruction of a law enforcement officer, obstruction of a firefighter, obstruction of an EMS worker. They have varied punishments, misdemeanor and felony, depending on whether or not violence is offered against the person. And it doesn't require this knowledge that most people who are not trained officers lack. And that's the 21 or 25 foot aspect to it. It's not a concept even as someone who's been practicing criminal law since 2007 has ever heard of until these bills have been discussed in these committees. The other concern, I guess, practically we would have about the way that the crime is structured is that if the idea is to protect these first responders and allow them to be focused on their work, they're going to have to be offering these verbal warnings and making sure that people are getting the warning when they're beyond 25 feet away. It just seems very cumbersome, especially given that we have ways to address all of the behaviors that are listed here. You'll see them in lines 23 through 25 already in our code. That's all we have, unless you have any questions.
All right, any questions? All right, Representative Penish.
Thank you. My question is about the 25-foot rule. That's not listed in any obstruction statute, right?
It's not.
And is there any case law that says what a reasonable perimeter area around a law enforcement officer would be that would not qualify for obstruction?
I'm
Or
not
would-
aware of any, I'm sorry, but I just don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? I don't see any, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, what's the will of the committee? All right, and do you have a comment? No, second. Discussion, second? All right. All right, any discussion? All those in favor of SB 268, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Passes, thank you, Whip Robertson. And you have one more bill with us, that is SB 218.
Thank you, Madam
All right,
Chair.
proceed.
And on 218, this committee knows this statute as well as anybody, because over the last 3 years, we've been discussing it and we've got it through. And just briefly, what we're doing here with this is we're moving the Prosecuting Attorneys Qualification Commission away from PAC and moving them over to the AOC, Administrative Office of the Courts. We feel that it's better equipped to deal with this type of commission, and at the same time, there's a cost savings. The only other substantial change that we're making in here is we are granting subpoena power. There was a request at the beginning of session that there was someone presented us with to consider subpoena power and search warrant power. Well, personally, I felt the search warrant power would be very extreme in those cases and very unnecessary and very evasive. We have other tools if needed, because that takes it to an entirely different level, which I would say would be criminal in those kind of cases where we would ever need a search warrant to be executed in the office of a prosecutor. So I was not comfortable with search warrants being a part of that, so that was taken out. I know Madam Chair and I have discussed some possible friendly amendments as far as the review of findings and appeals to the Superior Court, which I'm very comfortable with.
All right, any questions from members? So as I understand it, essentially, we didn't have a way for them to have any and/or just extensive investigative powers, and we're giving the commission that. Is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
correct?
Very limited under the subpoena.
Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Penish?
Thank you. Can you please explain a little more the budget issue that is causing?
It's less expensive to do it under AOC. They are better equipped. They have it's basically their flow. They deal with this kind of stuff each and every day, and it is subject matter experts dealing with subject matter experts. And PAC was a little bit of an odd fit.
Okay, if
Yes,
they
ma'am.
want to defend themselves, they're here. But
I think odd is a good word.
and this would be leaving it with more career people as opposed to political people.
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions from members? Anyone signed up for SB 218? I don't see any unless I'm missing. Okay. I do have a friendly amendment, but I'll ask, before I do, I will ask the will of the committee.
Moved to pass.
Okay, we have a motion to pass and a second. For the suggested amendment, I'm on line 73. just regarding the appeal. So submitting a petition for, I want to strike the word review and insert a full hearing to the Superior Court. And then line 74, starting with the word such and going all the way to the end of the sentence on line 77. I want to strike that language and replace it with any decision by the Superior Court will be subject to review by the Supreme Court. Any questions on that amendment? And is that your understanding, Whip?
Yes, ma'am. It's
All
my
right.
understanding, and I think it balances the scales better for the
Yep.
for the accused, if you will.
Okay. Any questions? All right. I don't see any questions. I'm sorry. I will move to amend. I will move for my amendment. Any second? All right. Any other? Okay. All right. I'll take a vote on the amendment that I just stated. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, same sign. All right. So that amendment passes. Any other amendments, Chairman Smith?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Going to line 163. Right after the word commission and before the semicolon, I would insert and members of the state bar in good standing.
Sorry, what line?
163.
Can you, Whip Robertson, what LC number are you
I'm looking at a
for?
different LC
Yeah.
number.
Oh,
I'm looking at.
We have LC 492348S. Is that?
No, ma'am. Looking at something different.
Which one is correct?
Which should we be looking at, Whip Robertson?
No, ma'am. You're looking at the correct one. I was looking at the incorrect one.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
so we should all have LC 492348S.
Right. And we were on line 170.
excuse me. That'll change my line up just a little bit. All right. This will be at line 161
Okay.
for purposes of my amendment. It would still be the same, but to repeat it after the word commission and before the semicolon, I would insert and members of the state bar in good standing. And then in line 165, I would insert a comma after system and insert and members of the state bar in good standing with a comma after standing. And that's my amendment.
Bless you.
All right, we have a motion and a second on Chairman Smith's amendment. Any questions? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, same sign. All right, Chairman Smith's amendment passes. Any other amendments? Okay, and we do have a motion to pass in a second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of SB 218, LC 492348, say aye. Those opposed, same sign. All right, it passes. Thank you, Whip
ma'am.
Robertson.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. All right, next is SB 61. I believe I saw Senator Dolezal. How are you? Good. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 61 is part of a really 3-bill package that the Senate passed out as a school safety package. I know you all have been doing work over here as well on this important issue, and Senate Bill 61 really does 3 main things. The first of which is it introduces a new crime really two new crimes of a terroristic threat against a school or a terrorist act against a school. It allows minors to be charged as adults in Superior Court for terroristic acts only, but not threats. That was one change made to the bill throughout the process. We also move into Superior Court jurisdiction over cases involving criminal conspiracies or criminal contempts for the underlying offenses of which Superior Courts already have jurisdiction. So that's murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, rape, aggravated sodomy, aggravated child molestation, and a few others. And that's really Section 1 and 2 of the bill. Section 3 of the bill requires DJJ, DHS, and DFACS to notify public schools when an enrolled child or a would-be enrolled child is placed under either electronic monitoring, in-home confinement, or intensive supervision program. This is the result of direct feedback from public schools that said there's not, and law enforcement actually, that both said there's not clear lines of communication for these children and between the school and the agencies when these children are placed under electronic monitoring. Section 4 outlines the details of the two offenses I just described to you earlier, terroristic threats and acts. That's lines 171 through 235. And then lastly, we introduced something called a site threat assessment that local schools must do by June 1st of each year. And this will be a partnership between local law enforcement or authorized individuals or agent groups as identified by GMA. And the goal of these annual site threat assessments is to open the communication lines between local school officials and law enforcement such that they identify and shore up any security vulnerabilities, and that hopefully over the year-by-year process of doing this on an annual basis, we successfully eliminate any threat assessments. The threat assessments roll up into later in the bill that you can see the school safety plan that under this bill then is shared with local law enforcement so that, again, we have that open line of communication between local law enforcement and each local school system. So it's a relatively meaty bill, so happy to answer any questions, but those are the key highlights of what we accomplished in Senate Bill 61.
All right, thank you. And it's a longer bill, but that was a very good summary, so I appreciate that. Representative Panish.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm really concerned about bringing more children into the adult system, because I'm sure you would agree a 13-year-old kid is not the same as a 18-year-old kid in terms of brain development, or even a 21-year-old, right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so what prompted this particular section to be put in?
Sure.
Was there a case that needed to be addressed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we, after Barrow County, myself, Lieutenant Governor's office, met with law enforcement members both locally and around the state, as well as with schools locally and around the state. And one thing that we heard due to the accelerated adjudication process in juvenile court is concern from law enforcement, specifically as it related to those accused of terroristic acts against a school. Currently, that would travel under disruption of a public school, and there's a number of metrics that you have to hit to be able to travel under that charge. Is that often these children who would indeed be a threat to a school are released because law enforcement is not necessarily able to go through the entire investigation process as they would through the Superior Court, as they have more time to build their case. And specifically, my sheriff identified a couple different cases where it was his opinion that had law enforcement had that time, that they would have been able to keep children safer. He identified, I'll pause, I see your reaction.
Well, yes, thank you.
Sure.
Well, I'm concerned because that's an issue for the investigators. That's not an issue. I mean, you're leaving kids in Superior Court in jail, in adult jail, sometimes with no bond on these types of cases, while the sheriff needs to investigate. To me, that's a sheriff issue, and not punish the child further by putting them in an adult system in Superior Court waiting for some type of disposition.
So we do that already, obviously, with the offenses that I mentioned earlier. And so I think this is a recognition that terroristic acts against a school rise to that level. And then I think that if you would think about, for example, Columbine, just to take a case that is doesn't have any recent emotion attached to it, that if we would have caught that earlier, and it would have just at that point in time been criminal conspiracy to commit those acts. Did those two gentlemen who committed that horrific act against the students in Columbine, in my opinion, and you can disagree, and that's valid, should be tried as adults and should face those stiffer consequences, because in the criminal conspiracy piece, the only thing that stopped them was perhaps opportunity or time.
May I have a final question?
Sure.
So it's interesting you brought that up. I was a public defender in Miami during the time that Columbine happened. And as soon as Columbine was over, kids were being charged with all sorts of crimes because they said something which really was stupid because they're kids, but not an actual threat. It's as if the entire system fell on these kids who, some of them are vulnerable, some of them have behavioral disorders, but not criminal ones. Some of them have mental health disorders, but not dangerous ones. And so that's actually the fear I have. And as a public defender, I had to fight to keep kids in the juvenile system, because we know that the juvenile system, if they think that the crime is bad enough, can detain kids during, if they feel like the crime is enough, and if the investigators need more time or the prosecutors need more time, they can ask for it in juvenile court. So with all due respect, I understand what you're doing. I can't agree to further allow children to be exposed to an adult system where all they learn is how to be better criminals, as opposed to addressing whatever needs they may have.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from members? We've got several people signed up, so I'm going to go
Get
ahead
out of the way and
and
let them
start
speak.
talking. Michaela Arciaga?
That was great.
Okay.
Good morning. This center.
That's fine. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. My name is Michaela Arciaga. I'm the Georgia Advocacy Director for the Intercultural Development Research Association, IDRA. We're an education, policy, research, and advocacy nonprofit. I feel like I should disclose that I'm not an attorney, but we are here with concerns around the ways in which this is going to exacerbate discipline and school to prison disparities that already exist in our state. We feel that SB 61 takes an overly punitive approach to the things that we are seeing for school safety, and doesn't take into account the circumstances that influence adolescent behavior, underdeveloped frontal cortexes that have to do with your inhibition control, learning disabilities, mental health, trauma, emotional health, etc. We already have existing procedures in state code, in the juvenile code, to handle many of the things that Senator Dolezal has listed out under terroristic threats, and we feel that that system is better equipped to handle the same things. To Rep. Panich's comments, specifically that it requires progressive systems of discipline to deal with the sometimes very silly things that young people will do. I'm a former high school math teacher. A lot of these kids were my kids. And so when we see these behaviors happen, a lot of it is because they don't have the same inhibition control that you would want to see from an adult. And the juvenile process, and specifically OCGA 20-2-1181 through 1185, that disrupting school operations part of our code and discipline code, is laid out to help address some of those things. Specifically, again, progressive systems of discipline. They have to check in with the student who may have made some of these or committed some of these behaviors. They have to check in with the family, and they also have to take into account whether or not a student has a disability or an IEP, and the certain protections that they're entitled to under IDEA. These are all things we would want to see when we're talking about kids. This is best practices in a classroom. It's also best practices for dealing with young people. And so we don't want to diminish the seriousness of the things that have happened, what happened in Winder, and also the behaviors and actions that happened following. I know there was a lot of concerns about copycat threats, but there is a lot of evidence that increasing punitive policy does not, in fact, diminish undesirable behavior. In fact, it increases, as Rep. Page mentioned. So at the risk of not being too redundant, we just would encourage the committee to consider not moving this bill forward. You guys have already seen a bill that would expand some of the charges that can be made to deal with the incidences like the school shooting in HB 627. That was Rep. Persinger's bill, to expand ag assault charges for juveniles, and also we are working on similar bills also from this side of the body in HB 268 that deals with some of the mental health supports. It deals with some of the intervention supports we would like to see for young people, and not maybe take this more punitive and harsh approach to disciplining our children. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. And I don't see any questions. Thank you. Morgan Bridgman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, my name is Morgan Bridgman, and I serve as policy counsel at Georgia Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. For those of you who aren't familiar, we are a 20-year-old nonpartisan nonprofit organization serving students and families statewide across the state of Georgia. And we're here opposing SB 61. Of course, we recognize the intention of the sponsors of this bill in keeping our schools and communities safer. But based on our expertise, our legal expertise in the programs that we run, we don't think that it accomplishes that aim. So to give you a few examples, we run a legal program across the state where we help students and families who are navigating the school disciplinary process. So encompassing a lot of cases that might be swept up under this terroristic threat. Just to put it into perspective, after the shooting, the tragedy at Appalachia, we had a sharp increase in the cases that we saw that would fall under this exact language. A third of those cases involved children with significant behavioral disabilities, and almost all of the cases ended up being non-serious, non-credible threats. So some examples would be children manipulating school supplies into the shape of a weapon, but having no capability of causing any kind of harm. Screaming at another student that they're going to kill you if, in the heat of the moment, they're getting in an argument. I don't know if any of you have spent time in public schools. I'm a former teacher, like Michaela. This is very, very common, stupid, but typical adolescent behavior. So we're deeply concerned about the impact that this is going to have in flooding both our juvenile and our superior court systems. The impact could actually be diverting critical resources away from finding and addressing those true, credible threats. Put it into perspective, in 2022 in Georgia, there were over 16,000 threat cases in schools. That was 2 years ago. That's the most recent data that we have, 16,000. And if even a fraction of these cases were prosecuted in Superior Court, we would be completely flooded in very little time. This is also what actually happened in Tennessee. The Tennessee legislature tried to pass similar legislation following similar tragedies in their schools. They had to go back and amend that legislation time and time again, given the exact repercussions that we're all concerned about. So while we appreciate the effort and we have enjoyed working on the House side on bills like 268 in line with best practices, what we know based on our experience on the ground, we think that that's a much better approach. And finally, Michaela touched on this already, so I won't belabor the point, but as currently written, these new crimes, and they're not just 2 new crimes, because now we have attempt and co-conspiracy as well. It's about 21 new crimes for young people. That these are in fact written in a way that's more punitive than if the children were prosecuted as adults. So for example, currently prosecutions could be based on uncorroborated witness testimony. Currently there are no protections for children with disabilities. Currently there is no stopgap requiring, for example, a behavioral threat assessment before automatically sending that case to Superior Court. So we're deeply concerned about what the impacts this could, what this could have on both our juvenile and our Superior Court systems. We submitted some line-by-line recommendations before this hearing, and we're happy to comment on those or discuss those with committee members in the future. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't see any questions. Thank you. Maisie Lynn? You have somebody else here with you?
I do. I'm Maisie Lynn Burton from the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. This is our lawyer of the week, Russell Gabriel.
Good morning.
He's most recently, I'm going to get it wrong, I'm sure, but he was the director of the Criminal
Defense Clinic at the University of Georgia School of Law for the last 15 years or so, and I've been a criminal defense lawyer for the last 35.
from the Athens area. This is not an easy. Like all of you, we have been shocked by the incidents of violence and death that have impacted Georgia's children here in our schools, especially in Winder. Prioritizing school safety is an effort we support and appear today to encourage you to craft your responses to these tragedies with thoughtful, evidence-based, fiscally sound policies. And that is not what you're finding in Senate Bill 61. It's easy to lose sight of who we're talking about when we talk about these children. So I would, if you'll indulge me just a little, and picture with me the last child who passed you a note as a page asking you to visit with a constituent on the ropes. That's the face of a child who could be impacted by the decisions you make about Senate Bill 61. A child as young as 13 years old. These are children who may not have even seen their bodies complete puberty, who certainly do not have a fully developed frontal lobe. Some are only halfway there. The frontal lobe, as you've already heard a little bit about, is the part of the brain responsible for higher order cognitive functioning, decision making, planning, impulse control. Some of our friends are focusing, friends of the opposition of this bill, if I could say it that way, are focusing on some of the sections. We're going to just focus on two, Section 4 and Section 1, and I would like to take them in that order. Because the new crime that's being established in Title 20 in Section 4 of your bill, despite the is in spite of the existence of a crime already in that title, just ahead of this one. It's 20-2-1181. That, when especially coupled with the crime of terroristic threats that we find in Title 16 that you all have talked about in other situations and scenarios, could serve to address the behaviors and circumstances that played out here in Georgia last year. The difference is that in Title 20-2-1181, it criminalizes, similarly, the knowing, intentional, or reckless disruption or interference with the operations of a public school bus stop. But in Title 20, it focuses, which is the article that focuses on elementary and secondary education settings, it enjoys some thoughtful provisions allowing for school discipline to be given a chance before a child is subjected to the criminal legal system. And that's a little bit of what you heard from Georgia Appleseed as well. The Title 20 constructs reflect the research that we know overwhelmingly concludes that prosecuting children as adults leads to worse public safety outcomes, increases recidivism, and harms youthful development. For example, juvenile incarceration reduces the likelihood of high school graduation of that child, and it's a range depending on which study you look at, but it ranges somewhere between 13 and 31% of those children will never finish high school if they end up in the criminal legal system. The significant expansion of what we tend to refer to as SB 440, these are these crimes where you're giving exclusive jurisdiction to superior court over children who are 13 to 16 years old, was first enacted to capture those 7 deadly sins. The crimes that most of us would agree are the worst of the worst crimes. If you pass Senate Bill 61, this will represent a sea change in the approach this body has for decades taken when deciding whether to treat or attempt to punish a child as if she were an adult in the criminal legal system. Georgia has long recognized the need to respond swiftly to unlawful behavior, even in children. And juvenile courts are uniquely designed through statutes, court rules, and other policies to provide swift, certain, effective, and community reintegration for the children. In some cases, for her family. They implement evidence-based interventions. They prevent the improper confinement of children with disabilities. And if we take it back to a real practical level, no parent in this room would punish a 15-year-old for something they did when they were 13 years old. But that's what happens when a child ends up in the adult system. It is not swift, it is protracted, and they can wait months and even years in DJJ facilities. For instance, over 800 children were charged with terroristic threats or acts in Georgia just last year. As filed, if those children were not granted a bond by the Superior Court, under this bill, they would have to be housed by DJJ, and that means they'd be in detention without access to any of the post-disposition rehabilitative services that we recognize children need. Under Senate Bill 61, school-related terrorist acts would be under Superior Court jurisdiction, as you've heard. But that new crime that's in Section 4 can be predicated on mere reckless conduct. There is no other offense for which a child can be prosecuted as an adult in our state as if she were an adult for merely reckless conduct. That's the equivalent of negligence. And you're going to take a child out of a rehabilitative juvenile court process and put her in a superior court for negligent conduct, recognizing that those often happen, as Michaela before me said, children who don't have fully developed impulse control. One of the other things that is worth noting is that Georgia now allows a prosecuting attorney or a juvenile court to transfer children that are 15 or 16 years old to superior court, treat them as adults for any felony crime. That can happen right now. So if a child commits an act that would be a felony and they are 15 or 16 years old, there is a way for them to be prosecuted as an adult in situations where it's warranted, not as a blanket remedy for, not even a remedy, a blanket reaction to very tragic situations. As you know, I'm joined by Gactel's Lawyer of the Week, Russell Gabriel, because there's another aspect of the expansion of SB 440 in this bill that is exceedingly troubling to us. You heard from Georgia Appleseed that it expands the application of this treatment by somewhere above 20 crimes, and that's because of the bits that are at lines 49, 50, and 51. And I'll ask Russell to tell you more about how expanding into the attempt and conspiracy space is troubling.
Thank you, Maisie Lynn. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the inclusion of attempt and conspiracy as which are offenses in and of themselves, right? Those are new offenses that the bill would add as designated felonies. And it is limited only in that it's attempt to commit or a conspiracy to commit the other designated felonies that already exist. But attempt especially is an exceedingly, it captures an exceedingly broad number or amount of conduct that the actual offenses themselves would not. Because the definition of attempt only requires that the government prove, that the state prove a substantial step, that the person took a single, what is referred to as a substantial step toward the commission of the crime, and whatever they did with the intent that they were going to commit that crime. So that's a whole lot less than having to prove the entire offense. For example, kid buys a burner phone, thinks it's fun for some reason, and they start talking about the things they could do with it, right? We can all get these and we can rob the bank. Now they have intent and they have a substantial step in that they bought this burner phone. That would be enough to fall within, to make that conduct a designated felony. That's the problem with the including attempt here for this purpose. The same thing could happen with a gun. A kid picks up a gun and they start talking about the things that they might do with it. Right? Now, legitimate concern there, but that in and of itself is an offense. And is the mere possession of a firearm with some statement about how it might be used is very different than an actual assault, an actual aggravated assault. Giving somebody your car keys, knowing that they might go do something but not being sure that they will. Giving them the means of transportation is a substantial step. And some expression of intent with respect to that is enough to prosecute that case. So when the offense of attempt, and conspiracy is similar, is included here, you're actually, the amount of conduct that kids, and kids especially, create, sort of impulsive, off-the-cuff behavior and statements, the kind of things that they do, the amount of that conduct that could be included here because of the inclusion in lines 49, 50, and 51 of attempt seems to me to be, well, as Maisie Lynn said, it's sort of a sea change in the use of exclusive superior court jurisdiction.
It's just one of the key examples of how Senate Bill 61 undermines the decades of investments this body has made in addressing violent youth crime and even youth violent crime. By focusing exclusively on punishment rather than rehabilitation, this policy would deprive children of age-appropriate interventions that are known to reduce future criminal behavior. This punishment focus also disregards calls we know have come from schools and communities for proactive measures to prevent these harms before they occur. As a result, we are here to ask you to remove Section 1 from Senate Bill 61 and to remove Section 4 from Senate Bill 61. For all the reasons you've heard about these children for Section 1 and for the mere fact that we already can prosecute and we can do it better with the schemes that we have in place now between Title 20 and Title 16, the very behaviors that we're concerned about. And we would stand for any questions if you have them.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Thank you. Well, actually, Chairman Crow.
Since he came all this way,
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify. You said that a group of teens buying a couple of burner cell phones and saying, hey, we could go rob a bank with these. You think that rises to the level of attempt to commit armed robbery? That seems a bit hyperbolic to me, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I could buy a burner cell phone and say I could use this to fly to the moon. It doesn't mean that I'm actually attempting to fly to the moon. It seems that's a bit of a stretch, and I just want to make sure that we're clear about what rises to the level of attempt to commit or conspiracy to commit the crime, and I don't think that does.
So I think that, as you put it, is a close question. If you change that language to let's go rob a bank from we could, I think, yes, it meets the standard. If a person were convicted, I think that the courts would uphold that as sufficient evidence.
So if we're at home and we say let's go rob a bank,
Doesn't matter where you say it.
sure it does. If I say it at home, let's go rob a bank, we never leave the house. Have I attempted to go rob a bank? I'm nowhere near a bank. If I'm standing outside a bank or if I'm across the street from a bank, that's a bit of a different story. I think that your examples, though, I think that they are, again, I think that they're a very, very, very far stretch. I mean, I've prosecuted cases for attempt to commit and conspiracy to commit crimes. Nothing that arbitrary has ever been. I've never seen anybody in my life try to prosecute something that arbitrary.
Chairman Crow.
Yeah.
But could you imagine if a school resource officer overheard that conversation and saw the phone?
If
That-
they said it
that would
overheard
change
it,
the
and
game,
then they would be at the school.
Right.
And there would be there would actually be an immediate threat that could be taken.
Right.
That is different.
Right.
Yeah, and they should.
And so, but I
And
get our
that
point.
rises to a level that could be an attempt or conspiracy to commit that because they're at the place where they're talking about possibly doing that violent crime.
Or they're at school talking about robbing the corner market on the way home, and the school resource officer overhears it. Our point is only that we can come up with hypotheticals where you and I can agree. Apparently, we just did, right?
It
what
don't
could-
happen very often,
it
but every
doesn't.
once in a while,
But
you
we
and
gotta
I
celebrate
get
it
on
when
the
it
same
does.
page. Yep.
And there may be some that we disagree on, but that maybe there's a DA in the state that agrees with him on. The whole point is that the range of behavior is just so broad that reasonable minds can disagree about whether that would actually get charged by a DA or even be found out. To your point, if it's at home, no one would know. But that there is this huge range of behavior that can qualify as attempt or could qualify as conspiracy that causes our concern about this particular measure.
And I think that what we've seen now with these acts that have happened is that erring on the side of assuming that it's just, kids being kids. I don't know that we can afford to do that anymore. I think that we are at a point now where we have to take these more seriously. And we need to make sure that the case at Appalachia, a year before or months before,
Right.
they were looking at that, and it don't seem that was thought to be real. There wasn't a lot of action taken
Agreed.
towards that. Turned out that was a mistake. I think we want to make sure that we don't, and I know 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, their frontal lobes may not be developed. They also kill people. I've seen them kill people. So just because they may not be as developed does not mean that they're not capable of committing these acts. So
Yes, for
thank
sure.
you.
And also to your point, and I would kind of draw on what Representative Panic said earlier, I agree with you that there were mistakes made before that child entered that school and killed those people. But punishing future children in this scheme to correct the mistakes of the adults in that scenario is simply bad policy.
And I appreciate that, but I don't see it as punishing future kids in a scenario. I think it's righting those wrongs and making sure we don't make those mistakes again. It's not looking to punish anybody. It's making sure that we don't reenact those same mistakes that I'm looking for.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're not saying that this couldn't be relevant information to try and prevent a crime. The issue is that overhearing that could by itself constitute a crime.
Yes.
And I would just offer that perhaps if we focused on limiting access to guns and red flag laws, that we might actually prevent tragedies before they happen instead of punishing kids that might just be running their mouth in an adolescent way. Thank you.
Representative Penish.
I just wanted to respond to Chairman Crow. I've represented kids charged with things like this.
Representative Penish, I'm going to take questions. So if
Sorry.
we can, if you want to reserve until, because we've got other people signed up, until discussion. Thank you. All right. Any other questions from members? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Megan Gordon.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Megan Gordon, and I'm the Policy Director at the Georgia chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. We provide free legal support to Muslims facing discrimination because of their faith, and we see a lot of cases where students are facing extreme and disproportionate disciplinary consequences, and their parents call us for help. While I really appreciate that terroristic threats is no longer something that automatically gets a child tried as an adult, I still have deep concerns about this crime being expanded in the first place. We see so many cases that back up this concern, and I'm going to tell you about just one of them today. We had a case of an 8th grader, 14-year-old named Tom. Well, that's what I'm going to call him because, you know, legal privacy and all that. Was new to the country. He and his family had just moved here from Bangladesh. He was immediately bullied upon starting at the school. Not 3 weeks in to him being in the U.S., he barely spoke English. And I mean barely spoke any English. One of his most consistent bullies approached him at lunch and asked him if he had a gun. Again, Tom barely understands what is being said to him, but he smiles and nods, and he is confused, and he goes, yeah, he said later that he thought if he agreed that this kid would stop bullying him. This bully then immediately complains to the school that Tom has a gun and threatened to bring it to school. So he's taken to a meeting where he's questioned by 3 police officers without his parents present. And by the time his parents are called to a meeting with school administration, Tom is on his way to be booked and have his fingerprints and mugshots taken at the local police office. Again, they have all been in the country for less than 20 days at this point. When he got home that night, his parents said he shouldn't make jokes like that. It wasn't even a joke. He didn't understand what was happening. He was suspended for a few days. And when he got back, everyone is asking him, like, what happened? Where'd you go? Why were you gone? And again, he doesn't understand how to communicate what happened, so he does this. He makes, yes. And again, he just got here. He doesn't understand, like, our school shooting culture, so he doesn't understand what hot water that's going to get him into. And the same bully immediately goes and complains that he has made another threat to the school. That was not his intention. He's trying to, like, communicate across the classroom, like, oh, this is why I was gone. I was suspended because of this conversation about a gun, right? He just didn't know how. He was very nearly charged under our existing terroristic threats law. And it's only because his parents called us and our legal team worked their butts off to get a settlement with the school where he's suspended for the remainder of this school year that this 14-year-old is not currently being charged under our existing, much more vague terroristic threats law. He didn't have an intent for any of these things. It's disputable, whether he understood even what was being said to him at all, and he was still very nearly prosecuted. This bill doesn't protect students like Tom. There are no protections for students who don't speak English, students with intellectual disabilities, students who, we have other cases from just recent immigrants who might speak English, but they don't understand our sensitivity around school shootings because they don't come from that context. So they say things that get them in trouble because they just don't understand yet why that's not appropriate to say here. I feel very confident saying that if Senate Bill 61 becomes law, charges will be brought against vulnerable students like Tom who lack intent because we already see it. And so for that reason, I ask y'all to please oppose this bill.
All right, thank you. I don't see any questions. Caitlin Ward. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairwoman and committee members. My name is Caitlin Ward, and I represent the Carter Center's mental health programs. Today, I'm here to speak in opposition of SB 61. At the Carter Center, we have prioritized school-based behavioral health by creating a collaborative consisting of Georgia Appleseed, Voices of Georgia's Children, and Resilient Georgia. As a member of the collaborative, we work independently and together to map availability of school-based behavioral health, including mental health promotion, early intervention, and services. We research, develop, compile, and disseminate tools for those wanting to implement evidence-based behavioral health programs in Georgia schools. This bill does nothing to address the mental health or behavioral health needs of the students and does not take into account for a child with disabilities or those that do not speak English. Instead, it focuses on the punishment side of the issue, creating more touch points with the judicial system instead of getting to the root of the cause. We believe that we should be providing better access to mental health services and a holistic approach to a child's needs instead of trying to escalate these issues to the judicial system, many of which should never see the inside of a courtroom. I urge you to vote no on this issue, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Thank you. All right, last one, DA Cranford. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody, Madam Chairwoman. So I didn't know this bill was going to be discussed today, and I was here for another hearing and saw it was up. But I've been keeping up with this and support it. So I wanted to step in and say that I've noted a few points that I think have been addressed to some extent that I think are worth saying again. But in my view, the current juvenile code doesn't sufficiently protect victims and the innocent public from, for whatever reason, very dangerous juveniles. And it may be because their brain's not developed or any number of reasons, but at the end of the day, like, there are teenagers, 13, 14-year-olds who pull guns on people and shoot them and murder them, and right now, under the code, if that victim gets to a good surgeon quickly enough and survives, then the shooter is treated as a juvenile. And right now, it is very difficult, in my view, and according to some juvenile judges I've spoken to get a case transferred from juvenile court to adult court. There's not much discretion for juvenile judges to do so compared to the discretion that a DA has to transfer a case to juvenile court, or even if a DA doesn't do it, the discretion a superior court judge has to transfer a case to a juvenile court. And what I think this bill does correctly is it kind of rebalances the code in favor of giving discretion to the people in the system to assess, is this juvenile a truly dangerous person that therefore needs to be treated as an adult, or, you know, does he deserve or she deserve being sent to juvenile court to be treated as a juvenile? I think as a matter of public safety, that decision is better made in the types of cases we're talking about by a DA in the first instance and a Superior Court judge in the second instance, as opposed to the much more strict and rigid analysis that a juvenile judge has to go through to transfer it up. I think there was clarity about this, but I think it's worth saying just to be clear. This only treats terroristic acts as an adult offense. I think there was maybe, it sounded confused to me in some of the testimony, but terroristic threats is not changed by this bill. A juvenile that commits terroristic threats is still treated as a juvenile. Terroristic acts, as the name implies, involves an act including with a weapon or a hazardous substance. Conspiracy requires an overt act, I think is the language of the conspiracy statute. Attempt requires a substantial step, if I recall correctly, is the language of the statute. So both those things require acts. To the chairman's point earlier, talking about a crime, if there is no act in conjunction with it, would not allow for a prosecution. Juveniles that are initially arrested as adults, I think it's worth noting, are held in youth detention centers. They're not held in jail with adults. To the point that was made earlier, these are really serious cases. Aggravated assault with a firearm. Sometimes those take time to investigate. The juvenile system does not give investigators and sheriffs, as the senator pointed out, sufficient time, in my experience, to fully investigate. And sometimes those full investigations can accrue to the benefit of a person accused. If there are multiple people involved, sometimes those investigations show who's most culpable and who's less culpable. So you can assess who should be treated as an adult, maybe who should be transferred to juvenile court. Starting it as an adult allows for a proper investigation to be done of these very serious cases where the innocent public and victims are at risk. And again, the DA has discretion to send it to juvenile court under this legislation. A Superior Court judge, on top of that, even if a DA agreed, could then send it to juvenile court. So again, I think this legislation rebalances in a fair and smart way the fact that we do want to try to treat juveniles differently, but in my view, we can't do it, to the detriment of victims and innocent public. And attempting an aggravated sex crime, I think that's a case that deserves to start with the DA and Superior Court. Why is this juvenile attempting to commit an aggravated sex crime against somebody? Why did they attempt to murder somebody, or why did they pull a gun on somebody and commit an aggravated assault with a gun? Those are very serious crimes that, quickly turn into, even worse crimes. And I think it's to the benefit of the community that those are taken seriously and they start being treated as an adult. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a question. Representative Panich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. You made a point of saying that it's harder for a juvenile court judge to move a case to Superior Court. Juvenile court judges aren't elected, right? They're appointed by the Superior Court bench?
Yes.
And Superior Court judges and DAs are elected, right?
Yes.
Shouldn't it be harder for an unelected judge to move a child to the adult system than it is the other way around?
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but that kind of highlights why I think that case should start with the elected DA and elected Superior Court judge. And if they think it's not, worthy of being treated as an adult, it's really easy for them to transfer it down. But if an unelected juvenile judge is really concerned about a kid, it's a lot more difficult for him or her to transfer up.
You corrected something I said, and I appreciate it. The YDC point, I said that they were going to adult jails. I misspoke. You are correct. So I just want to thank you for that correction.
No, thank you for the questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, that's everyone that's on the sign-up list. Did I miss anyone on SB 61? All right. Senator Dolezal, if you want to come back up, and I'll have you maybe just do a closing remark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and those that came to testify. I do certainly appreciate what I think is all of our starting point, and that is that we want our schools to be as safe as possible. And I appreciate the robust dialogue around how we get there. And I do think that reasonable minds can disagree. The DA outlined a couple things I think that's probably worth highlighting. First and foremost, we took terroristic threat out as Superior Court as charging as an adult through the process in the Senate. I have the details on conspiracy and attempt on crimes if anybody wants to see those code statutes. I think that the other thing to remember, we were instructed, I think thoughtfully, to imagine the face of a page who approaches us with a piece of paper at 13 years old. I would ask you to imagine the face of a 14-year-old who walks into a classroom with a weapon. Those faces look the same, but their intent is very different. It was a 14-year-old in Georgia. It was a 15-year-old in Wisconsin, both of who took the lives of individuals in a school. And so I think that what we are attempting to do here is to recognize that it is the actions of individuals in conjunction with their age that should determine our path. And I think that this is a measured approach to ensure that those young people, regardless of the state of their frontal cortex and the development therein, to look at their acts, and when they are involved attempting to or conspiring to take the lives of other individuals, that is something I think that does rise to a different level of crime, and that is what we recognize in this. So thank you, members of the committee, for the discussion. Certainly appreciate each and every one of you, as well as the people who testified for and against this.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Representative Roberts. Do you have a question?
I don't have a question.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. What is the will of the committee? All right, we have a motion to pass and a second. Any discussion? Do you have a discussion? All right. Representative Roberts, your light was on first. Did you have a discussion or? All right, Representative Pennish.
I move that we strike sections 1 and section 4.
Second.
All right, there's a amendment to strike section 1 and section 4 and a second. All those in favor of Representative Pennish's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
And I'll vote no, so the amendment fails. Any other amendments? All right, we have a motion. Any discussion? All right, Representative Roberts.
I just can't stay quiet. That 14-year-old had access to guns that he shouldn't have had. The adults were warned, law enforcement was warned. I am not excusing anything, but we have traumatized kids in these schools by not providing them with appropriate mental health options. We should be spending our money on that because they are traumatized by these school safety, what do you call it? The drills. Oh my God. Active shooter drills, that's the word I was looking for. We have not limited access to these kids to get weapons to come into these schools. These kids are hurting. I don't know a single parent that when their kid was in middle school, 13, 14, 15, that didn't have a child that threatened suicide, was socially a mess, whether it's hormones. We have created mental health parity in this chamber, but you are saying that we should just disregard the fact that the brain has not been fully developed. That is insane to me. The laws already provide for ways to handle this, and we're talking about locking up babies for things that there needs to be more analysis. It should not be this punitive treatment where they're going to go to jail and learn and never get out of the system. And we've already got that in Georgia with one of the highest prison rates, one of the highest, longest parole rates. I mean, the pipeline from school to prison is insane, and this is only going to exacerbate it. And so I cannot support this bill.
Representative Pennish?
Thank you. Likewise, I can't support this bill. Chairman Crow made a comment about that he wouldn't prosecute people for things that sound outrageous. I've represented plenty of kids who have said something similarly ridiculous and not intending anything and having no access to a way to carry anything out. So, I mean, as a criminal defense lawyer, this bill should be great. I'm going to make a ton of money by people whose kids are now going to be prosecuted as adults. This bill is just, this section is just bad. It's bad for state policy. It's bad. Kids can already be tried as adults for murder, doing something like this. So I have a problem with this bill.
All right, Chairman Crow.
Two things, and I'll address that one first. The last thing you just said is that kids can already be tried for murder as adults. That is true. We're trying to prosecute them now before they actually kill somebody, before they actually commit murder. So, and yeah, I didn't prosecute cases, just to be clear. I simply made the arrests, and the DAs decided to prosecute the case or not. To Representative Roberts' point, though, she made a statement earlier that about the guns and access to the guns. I just want to reiterate again, the guns are not the ones that are committing the crimes. I went to school, now this is many years ago, but when I went to high school, most of my friends and I, at different times or another, would come to school in a truck with a rifle in the back where we had been hunting over the weekend. Nobody ever used those. We had access to weapons. We never used them to kill anybody. And so there's a societal issue of why people are committing these crimes, not the tool of which they're using it. So.
Chairman Smith?
Senator, good to see you again. Hope everything's good in Forsyth County. We love going up there. Real quick, this may have had a companion in the House, as I understand it. Holt Persinger had a bill similar to this. I don't know if you were aware, and I don't expect you to. It seems similar. What we can do after today, or shortly after, I can get you a copy. If you would be amenable, let's just sit down and go over that bill. I don't know if y'all moved on it.
I don't know either.
I
don't believe so yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I would submit to you is this, that we look at that between full and this committee meeting right now, just to see what you think. I think it would accomplish a lot of what you want to with this bill. So we can just talk offline for it.
Thank you.
All right, any other discussion from members? All right, we have a motion and a second on SB 61. All those in favor of passing SB 61 say aye. Those opposed say same sign. No. All right, it passes. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back for our last bill. Thank you. Esther, can you close that? I'm sorry. All right, we are back. We have one more bill left. It's SB 244. Senator Beach, if you can tell us the LC number first, just to make sure.
LC 473618S, Senate Bill 244, Committee Sub. And basically, this is a very simple bill. After what you just heard, this is very simple. If a prosecuting attorney in a felony or misdemeanor case is disqualified for prosecutorial or personal misconduct, and the overall case is dismissed by the courts, those individuals that were indicted are entitled to an award of reasonable attorney fees and cost incurred in defending themselves in the case. This will happen very rarely, but the judge will consider the reasonable attorney fees and cost. The fees will be paid by that county which in the criminal case was brought. And again, in conclusion, the prosecuting attorney must be disqualified for misconduct in the case, and the case must be dismissed by the court. And those that were indicted then can seek financial relief. I mean, it passed 55-0 in the Senate. I think it's a very common sense bill, and I would ask for your support. Any questions?
I've got several questions. I'm going to start, and I'm just understanding the intent. When we're talking about the improper conduct, we're talking about improper conduct on this specific case, correct? On the defendant's case?
Correct.
All right. Representative Penish.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, you said improper conduct or professional or personal misconduct. What
Correct.
is personal misconduct that has something to do with the actual prosecution? Or are you talking about Fonnie Willis having an affair with Nathan Wade?
Look, she was disqualified from the case for misconduct. And I'm not going to get into her personal life, but I'm going to tell you there were 15 people that were indicted, ruined their lives. They got a they had to go to Fulton County Jail, got a mug shot, fingerprinted. They have to report to a some kind of officer every month. One of the defendants, a really good attorney, cannot do attorney work now, cannot do special master cases because he's indicted. Another one that got indicted went to get their TSA renewed and could not get their TSA pre-check renewed because they're indicted. She's ruined their lives for no reason. It was a witch hunt, and these people need to be, one, get their reputation back, but two, get compensated for the money they've spent on this case. And they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she's been disqualified, and the case has been dismissed. This will happen very rarely, but it did happen in this case, and they should be made whole.
Representative Roberts.
First of all, when was the case dismissed? I'm not aware of that.
The Court of Appeals has dismissed the case.
On her disqualification?
The Court of Appeals has dismissed the case. She's appealed it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will rule, hopefully, in the next 30 days. Now,
about her disqualification. I want to be very clear about what you're talking about.
About her disqualification, and the case will be dismissed. It'll go back to Pete Scandalakis, and he will then decide what to do. And I'm saying if that case is then dismissed, then they should be able to ask for reasonable attorney fees and reasonable cost.
Okay. My understanding is that she's appealed the disqualification.
She has.
Correct. Then it will come back and it will be determined whether a prosecutor will continue the case.
Correct.
In this particular situation, it's not about the underlying facts of the case. It's about the fact that one of the defendants is the President of the United States, and no prosecutor is going to take that on. I'm not aware that the case has actually had a trial yet, and that a jury has determined whether or not there was guilt or innocence of these defendants. So you are acting as if you are judge and jury in this. And oh, by the way, have you done a fiscal note on this bill? Because Fulton County will absorb millions and millions of dollars in this litigation cost, and your constituents will carry a big chunk of that money. They got the highest property taxes and they got the highest income up where you are. So are they aware that you want them to foot this bill for Trump because of your love for Trump?
This is not about President Trump as much as it's about the other 15 defendants that were wrongly accused in this case.
That's your
And
opinion.
that's my opinion.
Okay. But you're legislating on one man's opinion, not a final determination by a jury of our peers, which is what this country is founded on.
Representative, it's not going to a jury. It's being dismissed. And if it's being dismissed, the case is dismissed, and she was disqualified, they should have the ability to recoup their hundreds of thousands of dollars. I know we have a state senator that spent $500,000, Sean Still. He should be able to recoup his money. You would want to recoup your money. If you had to go down and get fingerprinted, mugshot, and get accused and go into your church and people whispering about you being indicted, it's a scarlet letter. You would want to have your reputation back and you'd want to have your financial restitution.
Thank you.
Don't think you wouldn't.
I don't see any other questions. Senator, and I don't see anybody signed up. We're going to go ahead and hold this as a hearing only today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we're adjourned. Thank you.